In listening to some familiar masterpiece like the Fifth Symphony, I suppose many music lovers must have asked themselves, how did the composer come to write it? Was it the result of some sudden inspiration, or was it built up bar by bar the hard way? The idea of inspiration has always been popular. It reflects the romantic image of a great composer as a supernatural being unaffected by normal human limitations. It's been aided and abetted by the stories we read of Handel composing the whole of Messiah in 3 weeks, or Mozart his 3 greatest symphonies in 7 weeks, works as perfect and as vastly different as the E-flat, the G minor, and the Jupiter. Or think of the whole host of works Schubert wrote in the last year of his life alone. The manuscript of his great C major symphony betrays the speed with which it must have been thrown down into full score, for it incorporates a famous last-minute second thought, the changing of this into this. However, we shouldn't be misled into thinking that speed, in the case of Schubert and Mozart, implied ease. When Mozart dedicated 6 famous quartets to Haydn, he described them as the fruit of a long and laborious study, although we can assume long to have been a relative word in his case. But when Beethoven said, "I carry my ideas with me for a long time," he meant just that. We have the testimony of his sketchbooks. We find this phrase, for example, noted down among the sketches for the violin and piano sonata, opus 30, number 1, and marked andante. It bore no immediate fruit. 20 years later, it flared into life in the first movement of his last piano sonata, opus 111, having meanwhile changed its key and character completely. It's often been said that Beethoven could do more with 2 or 3 notes than most composers with whole handfuls, but the vital thing is the choice of those notes and their exact placing, the long process of trial and error that they represent. Take the case of the Fifth Symphony we were listening to just now. We look into Beethoven's sketchbooks and see the many changes and rejections that were needed before it reached its final familiar form. Rejected developments like these, for example. We see a mere fragment of an idea that grew in Beethoven's hands into one of the most powerful passages in the whole symphony. Then the slow movement. It appears early on as an andante quasi menuetto. On the surface, not a very promising idea, and yet it was miraculously transformed into this. Then again, it's hard for us to imagine the Fifth Symphony without its triumphant finale in the major key. And the sketches show that this wasn't part of Beethoven's original plan at all. At one stage, the finale was planned very definitely in the minor key. The sketches show us many other fascinating things, like the cross-influences between different works. The Fifth Symphony and the Fourth Piano Concerto, although very different in character, share a certain rhythmic motive in their first movements. This figure. It dominates the first movement of the symphony, and in a different way, the concerto. So it's not surprising to find sketches for these works on adjacent pages. And here's a projected finale theme for the Fourth Piano Concerto. Part of it developed into the concerto as we know it. But what happened to the unused part of that sketch? It became the orchestral motive in the Prisoner's Chorus from Fidelio. I think these brief samples show that the Beethoven sketches have far more than academic interest. Above all, they're documents of human endeavour and achievement. They afford glimpses of a great mind at work at close quarters. Yet, and this is the real lesson we learn from them, how apparently spontaneous the final result sounds. The opening of the F major string quartet, opus 18, number 1, gives us a good example of Beethoven's working methods. We've just heard the end product. This is what we find in one of the early sketches. It seems that Beethoven's first concern was to capture some basic idea in no matter how primitive a form. The act of setting pen to paper was in itself a vital stage. From there, he could set to work. He tries out the opening idea in various rhythmic forms. Here are two of them. That double-dotted rhythm was promising, and he noted down some possible developments of it. These Beethoven rejected, but meanwhile the idea of a dialogue between cello and first violin suggested itself. And this he preserved and elaborated upon. And here's a further rhythmic variant. Does this sound more familiar? Now, and only now it seems, is the stumbling block discovered. Change from 4 in a bar to 3 in a bar, and the movement takes wing. And so, as so often with Beethoven, an apparently simple idea has been through the fire of creation and emerged in its most potent, tested form. Let's hear some of its later developments in the quartet itself. Our hard-won theme has in fact become an all-pervading personality, and like the opening of the Fifth Symphony, it throws its shadow over an entire movement. We owe our knowledge of Beethoven's sketchbooks to two things in particular. First, to the fact that Beethoven, for all his notorious untidiness in mundane affairs, kept them with care for his own use. Secondly, to the work of the great researchers, in particular Gustav Nottebohm. However, two further points must be emphasized. At the time of Beethoven's death, the books were undervalued, auctioned off, widely scattered, and maybe in some cases lost forever. In addition, there's bound to be an element of conjecture in identifying and deciphering the random jottings Beethoven made for his own eyes alone. Nottebohm's first publication in 1865 was a commentary on a sketchbook dating from the years 1801 and 2. From this we learn a good deal about the birth of the Opus 30 violin and piano sonatas, the Opus 31 piano sonatas, and the finale of the Second Symphony. We learn, for example, that the finale of the Kreutzer Sonata was apparently intended for an earlier work in the same key, Opus 30 No. 1. Its place in the earlier sonata was taken by a much milder set of variations on this theme. This would seem to have derived from the following sketch, and Nottebohm was cautious when he added the word probably. The derivation seems obvious, but here's a less obvious derivation. We find a rather grotesque waltz in E-flat major with pedalling and fingering marks, presumably a piano piece. Can it be a coincidence that this appears among sketches for the D minor piano sonata, which adopted and transformed a similar idea in its tragic finale? Here, however, is a more direct lesson in the art of musical composition. There's an unwritten rule that to say a thing twice may be good, but 3 times is dangerous. Yet at the opening of the C minor violin and piano sonata, we find this in the sketches. few pages later, the self-critical mind intervenes. Twice is enough. And then, as we know it in the sonata, a new motive appears. Towards the end of this same sketchbook, we find a fascinating link between different mediums. The string quartet had a great influence on Beethoven's other writing, and especially on his piano music. A quartet texture turns up in the piano sonatas from the early C major, opus 2, number 3, to the variations of opus 111. Here in the sketches we see the influence at first hand. A fragment scored for quartet, and this changed its direction into a piano sonata, opus 31, number 1. For many people, the first interest of the sketches lies in the art of melodic shaping. So let's take an example of Beethoven at work on a theme pure and simple. It's the menuetto movement from the G major violin and piano sonata, opus 30, number 3. First, an early sketch. Beethoven's problem here was to find an opening to match the eloquent second half of the theme. Here's a later version, still unharmonized and worked out, as usual, on a single stave. From the opening bars of that, Beethoven evolves a variant, a more distinctive idea. This now absorbs him to the exclusion of the original ending. He continues. The solution, the inspiration, if you like, took the best of both worlds. The new beginning, more fully developed, which then links up so marvelously with this from the earlier sketches. It may be argued that such trial and error is shared by all creative artists. Nevertheless, the overwhelming impression is of the vast gulf between Beethoven's earlier thoughts and what he made of them. Two examples from a much later period do show, however, that even a slight change can give an idea distinction. They concern the E minor piano sonata, opus 90. In the first movement, a commonplace series of sequences, brought to life by the changing of a couple of notes. And in the second movement, a theme in short, broken phrases, which were later bound together into a long, flowing melodic line. In such cases, Beethoven's art resembles the sculptor's, and very often the initial sketches seem little more than the rough basic material from which the living image has yet to emerge. Sometimes the latter part of a theme may arrive before the opening, as we heard just now. More likely it's the reverse. In this sketch for the opening of the so-called Spring Sonata, opus 24, we find the first two bars fully formed. After this, there's a mere germ of an idea. Yet it contains the essence. From those inanimate crotchets grows, as a plant or a tree might grow, a series of aspiring phrases, gracefully undulating. Until we eventually find the theme almost as we know it. Almost, but not quite. The final cadence still has to be fought for, although its rhythmic pattern was there from the start. Changed into this, and how flat that sounds after the stressed dissonance of the previous bars, which is in due course carried through to the cadence. This was a case where each limb of the theme was perfected by stages. Let's hear the familiar opening of the sonata. The sketches for the Spring Sonata also reveal an interesting piece of musical history, the speeding up of the traditional minuet into the volatile Beethoven scherzo. This sketch for the third movement is in fact marked menuetto. It wasn't only a question of speeding up. It became rhythmically subtler and incorporated the capricious time lag between the violin and the piano part. And so, a minuet in conception becomes a scherzo in realization. Nothing could better prove that many of Beethoven's departures owe their strength to their traditional origins. Even the scherzo of the Eroica Symphony went through a similar process in the sketches. Then, as the sketches progress, the word presto appears dramatically. The Eroica Symphony was one of Nottebohm's most famous researches. The relevant sketchbook disappeared during the last war in Berlin, but fortunately a photostat was preserved, and a study of it can only enhance one's admiration of Nottebohm's pioneer work in analyzing and deciphering its contents. Beethoven's fair copies were seldom models of neatness, let alone his sketches. Just now I likened Beethoven's art to the sculptor's, but there's another aspect of music, and especially large-scale music, which we might call architectural. Detail is shaped and influenced by context, and ideas are born, as it were, out of the whole. So, in the sketches, we often find Beethoven laying a kind of ground plan for a movement or a section of a movement before the themes themselves are clear to him. The first movement of the Eroica on its unprecedented time scale is a classic example. At one place, we see a fragment noted down with empty bars to denote the phrase length. And in another sketch, later it appears in a dotted rhythm with the spaces filled in. And by the time of the third large sketch, it's shaped almost as it stands in the score. Yet when we hear this passage in its place in the Eroica, it seems a continuous, spontaneous line of thought. But that, after all, is the secret of the great symphonist. Even the first two chords of the Eroica were an afterthought, according to the sketches. Having settled on the opening theme, Beethoven introduced it with shock tactics. This he modified, presumably to make the rhythm clearer. How much simpler and stronger was the eventual solution. On the subject of large-scale music, as we might expect, the surviving sketches for the Ninth Symphony are equally absorbing. They show at close hand the struggle in Beethoven's mind over the problem of the choral finale, how to justify the chorus, not only to others, but to himself. In the orchestral introduction to the finale, there are words behind the shaping of the instrumental recitatives in the cellos and basses, as they review and reject the themes of the previous movements. Then, as the joy theme is suggested by the woodwind, they acclaim it. And over the acclaiming phrase, over that, Beethoven wrote in the sketches the words, "Ah, that's it, now it is found." But the joy theme was not so easily found by Beethoven himself. As late as the end of 1822, we find this idea to the words Freude, schöne Götterfunken. The triple rhythm may have influenced one of the variants of the theme we know. As for the familiar theme, the first 8 bars appeared to be settled long before the continuation. So far, so good, but the next 4 bars are at first only hinted at. Yet, as we examine the progressive sketches, we feel that each one leads inevitably towards the final version. Beethoven had already experimented with the idea of a purely orchestral finale on this theme. It wasn't only the beckonings of Schiller's Ode to Joy that made him reject this idea for orchestra, apparently. He recognized its more intimate nature as a string quartet, and a quartet it became, the finale of Opus 132. To find the right medium for an idea, this has concerned composers great and small, and in his earlier sketches, not only the medium, but the character and tempo of an idea might appear undecided to Beethoven. Here's an example from his early period. It's written on 2 staves as though for piano solo, and originally marked andante. This eventually became the prestissimo finale to the C minor piano trio, Opus 1, number 3. Andante to prestissimo. And on the question of medium, we heard just now how our proposed finale theme for the Ninth Symphony became a quartet, so let's look at a reverse process. Among the sketches for the third Razumovsky Quartet, Opus 59, number 3, we find this theme. The sketch is in single notes, but the key is presumably A minor. A minor was to be the key of the quartet's eventual slow movement, though not on that theme, but on this. It seems fair to conjecture that the other theme was at least considered for the quartet, from its key and its position in the sketchbooks. As it happened, it became 6 years later the allegretto of the Seventh Symphony. So if a symphony may bequeath material to a quartet, the reverse may happen too. Mentioning the Razumovsky quartets raises an interesting point concerning the second of them, the E minor. Whenever he wrote a work in E minor or E major, Beethoven was curiously conservative about keeping all the movements in the home key, major or minor. This we find in the piano sonatas, opus 14, number 1, opus 90, and opus 109, and also in this E minor quartet. But how to avoid tonal monotony in a four-movement work? It was here that Beethoven decided on the unusual procedure of beginning the finale as though in another key, C major. In fact, the main theme is based on a tussle between C major and E minor. The sketches show that this harmonic feature predated any recognizable melodic feature. According to Nottebohm, the idea is first noted down in a very primitive way. In another sketch, Beethoven added an equally primitive accompaniment figure. This sketch went one stage further in the battle of keys before reverting to the opening C major. And that last figure was incidentally the only melodic figure to survive in the final form. Then there was the decisive change to a dotted rhythm, first in this form, then in this. And eventually with that simple upbeat figure that served so well as a means of recalling the whole theme on its later appearances. We'll pick up the quartet in mid-movement to hear one of these returns, as well as the final version of the theme itself. There, C major is still in the ascendant. It's a battle or argument that's only finally settled on the last page of the quartet. Tonality, that's to say key and key relationships, was one of Beethoven's greatest sources of strength. And in the sketches we occasionally find him changing his mind about the relation between a slow movement key and the rest of the work. For the C minor violin and piano sonata, an idea is sketched in G major. This later became A flat major. In the slow movement of the Emperor Concerto, there's an early sketch in C major. But the sketches for this theme continue in B major, the eventual key of the movement. Apart from the mystique of keys and moods, there were practical reasons for this change. The key of B major may seem remote enough from E flat, the main key of the concerto. But anyone who plays the piano will know that the note E flat can also be written as D sharp, part of the chord of B major. The key of B offered Beethoven another link. It enabled him to make a bridge into the finale by the simple process of slipping down a semitone. This bridge was noted down roughly in single notes. And in that bare outline, we can hear premonitions of the exuberant rondo theme of the Emperor. The question may be asked, what do we learn from the sketches, which were in any case purely private documents not intended for our perusal? In many cases, we can only conjecture about the meaning some jotting had for Beethoven and himself alone as a stepping stone to further thought. Well, anything that tells us more about a great composer and the workings of his mind is surely of value. We learn, for example, not to take masterstrokes for granted. We learn that genius is an infinite capacity for taking pains. We learn that in spite of his youthful fame as an extemporizer, Beethoven left little to chance or memory when it came to serious composition. Everything, it seems, must be written down, rewritten and rewritten again. We learn about the whole art of musical composition, from Beethoven's early days in Vienna, when he struggled with the different rhythmic forms of the rondo theme of his B-flat piano concerto. Should it be this? Or this? He chose the latter syncopated form, and so set off other ideas in the movement like this. Then again, a study of the sketchbooks can help to clinch and clarify many points of interpretation. The so-called false horn entry in the first movement of the Eroica, for example. We can dispose of the old-fashioned idea that this was a misprint or a wrong clef. There are numerous sketches for this passage, some on a single stave, and at one point a far more alarming harmonic overlap was suggested. One small but vital interpretative point concerns the end of the first movement of the Waldstein Sonata, where the chorale-like theme of the second subject returns for the last time and is interrupted by a series of pauses. It's tempting, in the interest of musical good manners, to soften the abruptness by making a ritardando long before it's indicated. Yet the sketches show that the element of shock or surprise was in fact the inspiration of the passage. Beethoven wrote 3 full closes, and then he hit on the dramatic effect of suddenly withholding the keynote. In a case like this, the sketchbooks are not merely fascinating, but helpful to the performer and the inquiring listener in revealing the mental processes behind a great work of art. We see Beethoven's reasons and his rightness more clearly than ever. As he said himself towards the end of his life, I carry my ideas with me for a long time, rejecting and rewriting until I'm satisfied. Since I'm conscious of what I want, I never lose sight of the fundamental idea. It rises higher and higher until I see the image of it, rounded and complete, standing there before my mental vision.